Does someone know? Yes. Oh, that's bad luck. Point at others. Are you responsible? Yes. Then the same story. If you're not responsible, good luck, order processed. Okay, that's just a joke, of course. But basically, that's something you are well aware. Mapping a process, if there is a clear process out there, and what you might be very well aware of, many companies nowadays, of course, have process maps and also have documented their processes. But I would like to warn you that if you're going to these companies as a consultant, of course, it's a good idea to get a copy of these processes, but do not rely that these processes map reality. Because in most cases, 5 years ago, someone mapped the process and the process looked like that, but later it changed and nobody updated the process description. So if it's critical, you have to check the process itself. Yeah? We make a decision and that gives a result, and that's very linear. We say every effect has its cause, and we are, let's say, the only decision, we are the only decision taker. So if there's a problem, there has to be one cause. But this is, of course, a very simplistic worldview. Usually it's a bit more complex. Usually that's something you have to learn. You're not the only decision maker in the company, sorry. Maybe if you make up your way to the CEO, then at least you're the most important decision maker. But usually it's several agents in the company making decisions, and the effects of the decisions might lead to an effect on a certain, I call it environment, but it might be anything, yeah. But it's not only you influencing, but also another decision maker might also influence something. So therefore it's not so easy, if you see a problem, to find out what is the cause. Because in many cases you have a certain feedback loop in this effect. And there's a nice picture. So if you look at this, you're the decision maker, yeah? You're making a decision, okay? So because you had to think about push left or push right. So you said, okay, push left. And what happens? You might have thought it. So your decision comes back to you. So, and what is cause and effect? Yeah, in this example. So in many cases, it's not so easy to say I have one problem and there's one single cause. And if your problem gets, let's say, more complex, more messy, and you're not sure what is cause and effect. So they're taking down the building, or what's happening? So if you're not sure what is cause and effect, you might even have to build a model of the system, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the system dynamics approach. Did you hear about the system dynamics approach? No. It's actually an approach from the 60s, 70s. Sturman, for example, was one of the first applying the system dynamics approach. And what you do here is basically that you model your problem, and I have to explain it briefly. You have certain state variables in your problem. For example, here it's about the world model, population, environmental pollution, production capacity, and you have your factors. You can, let's say, change and you can manipulate. And what you then do is basically that you make a simulation of the system behavior and then find out what are the effects if I change a certain variable. Because you cannot easily say, this here is the cause of the issue for everything. No, it's cause and its effect. So therefore, in such ways, you sometimes also have to model it and to simulate it. And for example, you might know this Club of Rome. In the 70s, they brought out a report where for the first time in the Western world something like sustainability was a big topic. And with help of a simple, bit more complicated model like this, but a still simple model of the world, yeah, they somehow tried to prove that the resources are limited, and if the development of economy goes on, we will go against these limits of the environment. And this was for us nowadays that's very clear, but in those days it was somehow a groundbreaking thought. So a system model, sometimes if it gets messy, you might have to build a model, and I think you might know other kinds of simulation, like discrete event simulation for production systems, which need, let's say, a lot of effort to build the model. These system dynamics models are, let's say, much easier to set up, and do not need much, let's say, very specific know-how to set them up. Okay, so this is basically, well, what is the solution? Because only by knowing that this variable has an effect on something we are interested in, okay, you can turn it in the simulation, but how can you manipulate it in real life? How can you implement it in real life? And as I said, there are two basic approaches to problem solution. The one of which are analytical methods or methods structuring the problems, and on the other hand, we have creative methods to which we come a little bit later. So in terms of these analytical models, there are also a number of methods out there, many more than I put on this slide. Sometimes, maybe as a hint, yeah, collect nicht existent but existing solutions. I mean, that should be also a first hint, because you can imagine when you come to a company that exists for many, many years, it might be not the first time that they tackle this problem. And of course, they also have clever employees, and they came up with solutions in the past. So you should make sure that you at least know what were the solutions that were proposed in the past. Yeah? But then there are logic trees. That's something we will check out briefly here. Morphological box is something you can check out. So if you're, what it basically is that you have different features. It's very often used in product development. So if you're talking about product features, you say, what are the different functions of my product? What are the different possible, how do you call this in English, the different possible variations of this feature? And then by combining, making all the different combinations, you find out a possible solution. So it's a trial and error thing. And then morphological metrics is a little bit more complicated, because then you have maybe two functionalities that somehow depend on each other. But if you look that up in any textbook or Wikipedia or so, you get a nice description, very easy to apply methods. What I would like to check out with you is this logic, because that's, and this is basically my basic question. And now I want to find out what could be possible solutions. And the logic tree means that I somehow, in several layers, find different possibilities how to solve this basic question. Yeah? And I will show you there are different kinds of this and what they mean. The most important thing here is that you pay attention that these different branches you start developing are, and we call this MISI. I mean, it's an acronym we used, it's very specific, but what it means is basically mutually exclusive, meaning that the solution, this solution should be independent from this solution. So basically that the two solutions do not overlap. I mean, it doesn't mean that you cannot use both. You can maybe apply both in parallel, but logically they should not overlap. What that means, I show you in the example. Yeah? And collectively exhaustive, what that means, that on every level you cover the complete solution space, so that you do not leave out a possibility in the solution space on every level. Because sure, if you leave out a certain aspect of the problem, yeah, you might lose a solution, because you're excluding a certain area of the solution space. And therefore, on every level, you try to make sure that they do not overlap in a logical sense, are not dependent on each other, and on the other hand, that they are collectively exhaustive, meaning that you do not lose too much of the possible solution space. Okay, so what does that mean? That's maybe, before I give you the several things, let's take a concrete example. I'm sure you have some kind of this problem every month. You might ask yourself, how can I have more money at the end of the month without incurring debt? Huh? I think that's a reasonable problem we're facing, at least from time to time, but as students, and I think especially as PhD students, that might be a very relevant problem for you. And the question is now how? How can we solve this? And the first step, of course, is somehow trivial, because the problem is trivial. But very basically, if I ask you how can you do that, with a little bit of thinking, you might come back to me and say, well, there are two possibilities. Either I increase my income or I reduce my expenses. And I mean, this now is definitely rocket science, so you have never thought about this solution, yeah? But it's very basic, and these two things are messy. So they're mutually exclusive, because increasing income has basically nothing to do with reducing expenses. I can do both, but if I increase my income, not necessarily I have to reduce my expenses. So they're independent of each other. So first point, check. And the second point is commonly exhaustive. What does that mean? Well, I do not lose an option here. And if you think about your balance on the bank account, well, old balance plus income plus inflow minus outflow is new bank account figure. So basically that's the complete problem space in our very simple example. Huh? Okay, so on the first level we are fine. Then we go on, we follow each of these branches. For example, increase income. And then of course we have several possibilities: receive more income from investments, receive more dollars from work, receive a windfall, so something, some opportunity. Yeah. Here, of course, if you ask for MECE, I mean they are basically mutually exclusive. I think that's something we can say. If they are really exhaustive, that's something we could discuss here, but it's a simple example. In reality, you would put a little bit more effort into it to make it exhaustive. But of course, as consultants, we always have a trick up our sleeves. So if we were too lazy, we just put one box which said other. And with other, it's always exhaustive. Yeah? Okay. And then here the same, reduce expensive. I don't go through the whole tree because it's very trivial, yeah? But just showing the idea. And for example, here receiving a windfall, legally, illegally, and of course here you can see the big benefit of a logic tree, that immediately it's very transparent what your possible solutions are. And at this point of time, you could immediately say, well, of course, this branch of illegal possibilities we exclude. Of course, we will not follow this. Yeah? With the, let's say, the problem definition, and you ask the question, how can I solve the problem, and try to keep MECE across the different branches. The second possibility is the so-called hypothesis tree that works differently. Basically, you start with an hypothesis. So basically, you say, well, I'm quite sure that this is the solution to the problem. But you recognize then, okay, you have to have some experience. Yeah, where does this hypothesis come from? But maybe you have empirical evidence or something like that. And then you say, well, my hypothesis is that this is the solution. And then you give your reasons. Yeah? And then you support your hypothesis with reasons. And that will be something we will see later at the end of our process, as we will use this for our communication presentation. But sometimes it's possible, for example, that could be a good thing for if you're doing an interview and you have an interview with an expert and you come to this expert and say, well, my problem is this and that, and then the expert says, well, very clear, this is the solution. And they say, wow, he already knows the solution, but then you should not go away, but then you should ask the 5 W questions. What are the 5 W questions?
Why?
Right, it's not why, what, when, where, but it's why. Like little children asking you, let's go there, why? Yeah, because we have why. So okay, I mean you should stop before he gets angry. Yeah, but the 5 W questions are why? Because the expert, of course, might say, well, this is the solution, very clear. I'm the expert, but you should not be content with the answer, but you should ask, yeah, why is this solution? Yeah, well, why? And then he will come up with something, and then you say, yeah, but why is this the important aspect? And why did you not mention this? And okay, and then you ask 5 times why, and if still after 5 why questions he still can give a rationale, he's basically giving you an hypothesis tree. Yeah? This is basically asking many times why, and then if this is all reasonable and there are good reasons for it, okay, it might be a reasonable solution. Yeah? Another tree might be that you somehow, that's called issue map. So basically you phrase your issues so that it can be answered in a yes or no manner. But this is really only suitable. It's more like you know it from programming languages, that you somehow say, okay, there's only yes and no. So you give one possible answer. Say, is this feasible? Yes, no. Maybe stop the process. I will show an example later. This is very specific. So here you already have to know the answer, and you also have to know the order you put the order of the rationales. So this is very challenging. I'm not sure if you can apply this if you're new to a project. One of the parties says yes, okay, but then we have to ask, if we assume this is right, then the next question is product line competitive in the market? Yeah? If we say yes, then maybe one possible action is to improve the efficiency of our programs and start an efficiency improvement program, as an example. If I do not buy maybe this one, then I say, well, but there are people in our company and managers that disagree. There are some that say, no, it cannot be achieved with the current structure. Might it be then a possibility to remove the structural weakness? Yeah? So basically we have to change our structures. Should we change our structures? And then some people say yes, then we go for a restructuring program, but still some other people will say no, and then I go on. So basically that's a map where you can map the different opinions from the different parts of organization and somehow structure a discussion. Yeah? So actually what you're doing here, you are structuring different opinions and following the opinions to the end in a logical way. And that also gives you at the end of the tree a number of possible actions of which you can select them. Yeah? And then here maybe among these 5 different managers now it becomes very transparent where they agree and where they disagree. And that might be also a benefit for the discussion. Specific creativity methodology. Then please check, are the participants willing to use this method? Because if you say, let's go for brainstorming, and everyone says, I say nothing, then it's over. Yeah? So check first. Then you have always a phase where you collect ideas, and the goal is quantity, not quality. So you try to collect as many ideas as possible. But of course, you have to reduce the number a little bit later, so you structure and clarify, and of course you will also assess the ideas. And actually explaining creativity methods is quite hard. We should do it in a case study, but we can't today. You very established methods, but they are, well, the application is very different. Yeah. So very briefly, to explain it very briefly, where do we start? What you already know, brainstorming. So how does brainstorming work? You already are an experienced brainstormer. So what is the basic idea of it?
As everyone provide his ideas without any criticize.
And this is very important. So basically you pose a question and said, okay, let's say, assume we have here a workshop and the question is, how can we reduce energy consumption here at the university? Might be one goal, yeah? And then I said, okay, welcome to our brainstorming session. Please give me your ideas how we can reduce energy consumption at this university. Then everyone will shout his ideas in a very unstructured way to me. And what I have to do is, while you're shouting, I have to note all your ideas, point by point. And very importantly, I do not give any comment. So it's not that I say, oh, good idea, or crazy idea or something, because of course you would immediately stop the process, but I'm just writing what you say. Yeah? And also the others, usually before you start brainstorming, you issue certain rules. These brainstorming rules you might know, where among other things you say, well, no critique is allowed. So if he makes a silly suggestion, you find totally crazy, you're not allowed to say anything, yeah? Because otherwise it will get really hard to collect more ideas. And as I said, this is really a challenging methodology, because usually I would never do this alone. I would always have a second moderator with me, so that one is doing the writing, so one is taking the notes, and the other is always looking to the people in the workshop, because otherwise I would turn all the time, I would turn my back to you, yeah, and you will stop with your creative process. So actually you need two persons. One person, because after a while the flow of ideas might stop, and then I say, well, you already have a lot of ideas. If you think a little bit differently, or make it bigger, make it smaller, make it faster, and so on. So I really have to put a lot of energy into this group that more comes out, and the others just taking note. And of course, what do you think, in which circumstances could you not or should you not apply brainstorming? So in which setups of the group should you not use the brainstorming methodology?
Maybe with manager show up.
Right, so if you have different levels of hierarchy in this group, it's very hard to run brainstorming, because usually the lower level doesn't wait for the boss to say something, or maybe doesn't dare to say something, because it thinks maybe later the boss will say, what silly ideas did you air in this workshop? So you have to make sure that the participants are willing and open enough to air their ideas. They are not afraid of critique of others, and they are not afraid that the others hear also, let's say, crazy ideas that might not be the right ideas at the end, because that doesn't matter. So you have to be very proficient as a moderator, a facilitator, and also let's say your group has to be very open. Yeah? So and that's challenging, and I think in not too many cases that's applicable. Then what you could do is, if you're afraid of that, you could use brainwriting. Brainwriting is very similar to brainstorming. The main difference is that you do not shout your ideas, but you write your ideas on a piece of paper, then put this piece of paper on a stack of paper in the middle, and you're allowed to take out other papers of that stack, read them, and write new ideas. Yeah? So basically it's a little bit more anonymous. You do not know where does that idea come from, yeah? But still you can make use of the ideas of the others. Yeah? Even more structured is this 6-3-5 method. 6-3-5 means, for example, you have 6 people in a group. You have a piece of paper with 6 lines, and per line you have 3 boxes. And how it works is that everyone gets an empty sheet of paper, and he's required within 5 minutes to write 3 ideas on it. Yeah, 3 ideas, in every box 1 idea. And after 5 minutes, you hand over the paper to your neighbor. Then of course on that paper he has already got the ideas from the first person, and then he has to come up with new ideas. And only if he's not really able to come up with completely new ideas, he can also check out the ideas that are on the paper and maybe just modify them. And after 5 minutes goes on, goes on, goes on, goes on. So the good thing is after 30 minutes, you have 6 papers filled with 6 times 3 ideas. So you have a lot of ideas. It's very structured in terms of timing, and for you as a facilitator it's very easy to run. It's very easy to run because it's well structured. The only effort later on is here in the structuring phase, because then of course you have a lot of ideas that have been already mentioned. So in terms of structuring and clarifying the ideas, that might take more time, but that's very easy to apply. Also, what is also easy to apply for beginners is this card query, meaning that you, like in brainstorming, you do not say please shout your ideas, but write 1 idea on a card, a small card, and just, let's say, keep your cards and just write fill out as many cards as possible. The only rule is 1 idea per card, and write in an orderly manner so that I can read it later. Yeah? And then you maybe run this for, I don't know, 15 minutes or 20 minutes. Okay, the disadvantage is of course that while writing on your cards you do not know the ideas of the others. And after the 20 minutes you go for the collecting phase, and you take the cards, read them, clarify them, put them on a pinboard, yeah, every card. You can structure them. If there are 2 or 3 ideas that are more or less the same, you can put it on top of each other. And of course, if in the structuring phase someone comes up with a new idea, of course you're happy to add the new idea. Yeah? And that's also a methodology, I would say, for a beginner I can really recommend, because the main action is for introducing the rules of that method. Collecting phases, basically everyone is doing his task. In structuring, you have enough time. For example, you can have a break in between. It's okay, we're at the end of the collecting phase, I take all the cards, and let's make a 15 minutes break, and then you can already read through the cards, prepare yourself a little bit. So I think that's very easy, not very, but it's easy to apply. That is something for beginners. And the other techniques like reverse brainstorming and creative provocations are not methodologies on their own, but they are somehow modifications. So reverse brainstorming just reverses the idea. For example, imagine we would run a workshop on how can we save energy at the university. Maybe you already have run 5 of these workshops before, and you're not too motivated because, well, that's a topic we already discussed 20 times here. What I could do then is that I just reverse the question, that I say, we make a brainstorming or a card query on the question, how can we consume as many energy as possible in our university? And that might be a more interesting question you haven't thought about. And then what we do is basically we create ideas on how can we consume as many energy as possible, and of course later on at a certain step we will reverse the ideas. Yeah? And that's a nice way if you are tackling topics that have been discussed many times, that you get new ideas, because the standard ideas you already might have. Yeah? Provocation, creative provocation is a bit similar. If you run a workshop and you are quite sure what are the standard ideas, then somehow you prohibit these ideas. One example, if you go for Volkswagen or BMW and they run a workshop on new business fields. So imagine there are, all of you are working for BMW, and I will ask you, please go for brainstorming new business fields. Of course, 99% of your ideas will have to do with cars. Yeah? Definitely cars. So that's not very interesting for me. So what I say is, we are connecting ideas for new business fields. But the condition is due, and we mentioned this, due to a new law, BMW is not longer allowed to produce vehicles, let's say with combustion engine or battery systems. So that you're not allowed anymore. Of course, this is an idea. Yeah? So you can skip all the ideas that have to do with vehicles, with passenger cars. Come up with other ideas. And this is, of course, a provocation. And you have to be sure that the group is playing or likes to play this game. Yeah? But of course, the big advantage is that you get rid of all the standard ideas. Yeah? And also, in terms of reverse brainstorming, just a warning: you are sure you cannot reverse all questions. Yeah? I mean, it might be not a good idea to run a workshop and say, well, let's do brainstorming how we can sack as many employees as possible or something like this. So that might be not a good idea. Okay, and then analogy and combination techniques are very special techniques. You can see from the picture what does that show. Two very different things. So what do you see? Do you see you're closest to the PowerPoint?
I see a shark over there.
A shark or dolphin, or I'm not sure, yeah? And a car.
Yeah.
So usually two things that usually should not meet, huh?
Yeah.
Because otherwise the dolphin is out of its water and or the car is in the water. That's also not a good idea. But what could that mean? Well, analogy. So what you sometimes do is that you invite experts, maybe from the field of biology concerning dolphins, and you bring your experts from the car manufacturer. And what could be the analogy you could transfer from the dolphin maybe to the car? What could be an idea?
The design, maybe?
Maybe the design, or for example the air resistance or water resistance. So why do these dolphins or also sharks have a very low resistance to the flow of water? Can we somehow transfer this to the car? And the surprising thing, and that's something you might know, for example, sharks and dolphins have a very low resistance to the water flow, but actually they're not completely.
The skin is not so smooth.
Right, the skin is not smooth, and that's surprising because as an engineer you would assume the smoother the skin, the lower the resistance, but that's not true. And that's an analogy you might learn. Okay. So this is an overview, and unfortunately we do not have the time to try it out. Otherwise, I usually take an afternoon, and then every group takes one of the methods and tries it out. But maybe, but hopefully you have got an idea what these methods are about and how they work. And as I said, you can look up the process how to apply this method in any textbook or on the internet. But maybe more important, a hint when to apply these methods. And here again a matrix. You have first of all to think about how big is the creative challenge. So is it more a standard problem, or are we looking really for some breakthrough ideas? So that's the creative challenge from low to high. And you have to check out how open are the participants in this workshop. Also from low to high. So maybe what is the previous knowledge, what is the know-how, what is the attitude to creativity? Because sometimes, I mean, if you invite a bunch of engineers, maybe they say, no, we are very structured, we know our analytics, we don't like this playing around with creativity techniques, okay? Also, does this creativity technique fit to the topic? Yeah? Because there might be a mismatch. If you have very serious topics to cover, maybe it's not so good to use a very creative techniques with a lot of jokes and team playing and so on. And of course the climate in the group, is it open, as you said before, are there several layers of hierarchy? So you have to be very aware of this. And then my recommendation is, as I said before, very easy to apply for you from the beginning is this card query. I think everyone can prepare. Maybe you should, first of all, if it's really the first time, maybe you make a test run with your colleagues, yeah, to try it out. Then the 635 technique is very easy to apply. Brainstorming, as I said, don't try it out for the first time in your company. Reverse brainstorming, combination technique, I didn't explain. Creative provocation is also even more challenging because somehow you have to convince the audience to take that provocation, accept the provocation. Analogy techniques are very challenging because you have to bring in experts from different fields, do a lot of moderation, provide a lot of information, so that's really a lot of preparation. And then association technique, I mean, this is something I didn't explain, but I've been to a workshop in my McKinsey times and later, and we had a facilitator explaining us creative methodologies, and he said, oh, now we're going for this association method, and we went out into the woods. So we went outside, walked through the woods, and he said, well, just look at the trees and get new ideas how you can cut costs in a hospital operation. And I walked through this woods and I said, okay, this is a tree, no connection to hospital operation. I didn't see any connection, yeah? And I thought it's a silly exercise, yeah? But actually there were some colleagues coming back from this walk, and maybe because of the fresh air or the oxygen or no ideas, and they came back with really good ideas and said, yeah, it was a good idea getting outside, looking at the trees, and the trees are very big at the bottom and they get smaller and they are flexible and blah blah blah, and they came up with, well, good ideas, yeah? But actually, obviously, I'm an engineer from my first education, so I'm actually not creative enough. And of course, it's not a good idea if you're working the first week in your company and you meet the board of managers, and your first task is to go with them outside and go for association technique. I mean, you might be very famous in your company afterwards, but maybe not too successful. So I would maybe better stick to this card query and not go for this very challenging. So I think this is for pros. So someone really has to know what he's doing. Yeah, I would not dare to apply this technique. Okay. So this is about creative techniques, and also check the costs and the benefits. And there are very simple possibilities in the workshop. For example, what you can ask the people at the end of the workshop, they say, well, here are our main ideas, maybe on the flip chart or on the pinboard, and they get little dots, yeah. And then there's a certain rule how they can distribute the dots among the ideas, and then you get the first idea. What is the, let's say, the most favorized idea and the least one. Then there are possibilities that you go for so-called ABC analysis. It's also very easy that you say, what are ideas where we are 90% or 95% sure that we should follow up, category A. Then category C is, these are ideas where we say, no, we see so big obstacles, or we already know from the past that these measures are not feasible, then they are C. But you give a rationale so that later you can explain why you did not take these ideas. And the B ideas are ideas basically where you say, well, we need some analysis to find out. For example, there might be a suggestion how we can lower the energy consumption here, maybe by new kinds of switches. But of course, you had to analyze what is the positive effect and how much do these switches cost. And maybe in this workshop, nobody knows. So you say, okay, it seems to be a good idea, but we have to clarify something. And that's a very pragmatic way, at the end of the workshop, at least not to go out of that workshop and have 50 ideas and no prioritization, but at least have a rough idea. A rough idea, what are your good ideas and what might be the not so good ideas. And then, of course, later on, you could go into even more detailed selection. For example, in a matrix, you could go also for cost and benefit and try to find out which measures have the highest benefits and the lowest costs, for example. Or even more cost-benefit analysis is where you also assess several attributes of these measures and somehow give a weight to the measurements and then come up with, let's say, a total sum of preferences and a preferred solution. So this is something that really depends very much on the problem, but I just recommend that at the end of your, let's say at the end of your idea collection or idea generation, that you do a certain kind of prioritization, because otherwise you're lost, because you have 50 or 100 ideas, and definitely you will not be able to run and analyze 100 ideas. That's much too much work. Okay, explaining what that is the way how you communicate a certain message. From my perspective, really useful. And from that we will create a communication plan and a checklist for the workshop. But that is something I will not go into very deeply, because I think that's common sense. But I will focus on the first methods. So, what do you think? What is the most important question you have to answer? First of all, ask yourself before doing a presentation or doing communication, sending an email, making a phone call, making an appointment for an interview. What is the most important question? What do you think?
The audience.
Well, the audience is a very important question, yeah. And to that we will come in a minute. So what is the audience? But maybe something even more important.
What's the purpose of the communication?
Right. What's the purpose? And that's really the most important thing, that you first of all say, well, imagine your presentation. Then you should ask yourself, after my presentation, what should be different after my presentation? And if you think about it for a while and you cannot come up with an answer, you should cancel the presentation, because it doesn't make sense. So something has to change. There is a purpose. Yeah? And of course there are very different purposes. For example, build credibility and trust. Maybe you say, well, I will not gain a lot of information and I cannot show a solution, but it's the first time I meet this group of people, and I want to show them that they can trust in me, and that I build a certain credibility. Yeah, that's also a purpose. The other could be reduced resistance. You know, there's some resistance. Many people in this audience are quite reluctant to follow these ideas. Yeah. So maybe you just run a meeting and let's say, okay, let's talk about why you oppose this problem. What are the reasons behind this resistance? So that could be also a goal. Convince someone, get green light for the next phase, for example, in a milestone meeting. Very often the interesting thing in presentations is that you present something, but actually you're interested in the information from the audience. So sometimes your presentation can somehow provoke input from the audience. And very often this is the case, that it's not mainly information going from you to the audience, but you're presenting something and then you want to see the reaction of the audience. Understand client's culture, promote understanding, trigger action, and so on and so on. So exactly what you said. Be so kind, before you point a presentation, ask yourself what should be different at the end of the presentation. Also, before you send an email to someone, it's communication, think about what should be the reaction, what do you expect from this email communication. Yeah? And then, I mean, you know it from yourself, as 80% of the emails I receive, there is no idea behind sending me the email. Yeah? So what is the idea? What is the purpose of your communication? Or also, if you pick up the phone and call someone, the same thing. Okay, just a thought, what is my goal of this? Why I'm doing this? And that's very important, yeah? Because if this meeting or the communication goes the other way than you planned, at least you know your goal, and then you can drive the communication back to your goal. If you are not sure about your goal, I'm not sure how this meeting or the telephone call or the interview is going. So now we come to the next step you mentioned already. If I know the purpose of my communication, I should analyze my audience. So what are, let's say, the expectations, and what, at what stage of that problem-solving process is my audience located? And here we have this ACA principle. Sometimes it goes also under a different name. And what does this say? ACA stands for awareness, conviction, courage, and action. And you can analyze your audience and ask yourself, okay, is the person aware of the problem? Because it might be that you invite some people to your workshop and we say, welcome to our workshop on reducing travel expenses in our company. And then the person might say, well, I have no idea that we are trying to reduce travel expenses in this company. I wasn't even aware of the problem. Yeah? Then there might be a possibility that that they are aware of the problem, but they are not convinced that they can do something. Travel costs, I heard that we want to reduce travel costs, but actually we have to travel, otherwise we cannot run our business, so we cannot do anything about it. Yeah? Okay. But there might be also people that they say, well, of course I know the problem, travel expenses, for sure. We can do something. Yeah, I think there might be a potential, but actually I do not know what to do. Yeah, I do not know what to do. The next one would be, well, I'm motivated to do, but please tell me the next step. And the last step, far to the right, was someone who is already taking action. We're sitting here in a workshop on travel expenses. I already reduced travel expenses in my department by 30%. Yeah? So, and this is very important to know. And what do you think? Why is it so important that you somehow can position your order and your audience in these categories? Why is it important? What can you make out of this information? What do you think? If I know, for example, imagine you are the audience of my presentation today. And of course, yesterday together with Shunda, we did an audience analysis of all of you, sure. And I know that you know nothing about the problem. You know the problem, but you're quite skeptical what we can do about it. You already implemented ideas in your department. So if I know that you have these different positions in this ACA concept, what can I do with this information?
We can customize the message, right?
I can customize the message. So for example, if he doesn't know that there is a problem with traveling expenses, I will show him a slide where I show him, well, traveling expenses exploded. They are 4 times higher than the last year, and reduce our profit by 20%. And then he will say, aha, that's very serious. Okay, let's talk about this, yeah? Or if I know that maybe he knows, okay, we have big amount of traveling expenses, but actually we have to travel because we have to send our employees to the clients and to our factories. Then maybe I show him a benchmark of our competitor and say, look at our competitor. They're running the same business, but can do it with 40% of traveling expenses. Then you have to say, well, then we have to find out how to do it. So you're totally right. We have somehow to fine-tune our message to the audience, and there are some suggestions here on that slide. And one important thing is be aware that, of course, you do not have to somehow adapt to all different kinds of types of audience in your presentation. Usually you have 2, 3, 4 weeks before the presentation. So basically what I could do is that maybe I make an appointment with him 2 weeks before the presentation and explain him the basics. Because if I would explain the basics to all of you, you would be bored. I already know the situation. So I meet you 2 weeks before, explain you the basics. I meet you 1 week before, explaining the details, and then in the meeting I can say, well, very quickly, as I already explained to you, and now let's go on with the next step. Yeah. So, but it's very important, because if you find that out, only in the meeting when you already developed your storyline and you already prepared your slides, and then I find out that he is not even convinced that this is an important topic, and he shows a lot of resistance during my presentation, it's very difficult because I'm not prepared for this situation. Yeah? And therefore, do a thorough analysis of this audience to understand what kind of information or story do I have to transfer to these participants, maybe even beforehand. And that's very important. And also, what is very important, you have to identify those people that have already worked on your issue. Because usually in a company, you're not solving a new problem. Usually it's a problem the company already had in the past. And you can be sure that one of the employees already worked on the topic. And of course, he's an expert on the topic. He might know even more than you. And if he's not convinced of your solution, he will be very hard to manage in the presentation. So better make sure that you get in contact with this expert, ideally convince him, or if you cannot convince him, at least know his arguments before you go into the presentation. Because in the presentation, it might give a bad impression. Is the grouping. So if the audience is quite open to your suggestion and you want to come to or get to the conclusion very directly, maybe you have just little time, then you would do it like Shirley. Governing thought, I hate you, and if this is enough, then the meeting is over, okay, accept it. Or, yeah, why? Why do you hate me? And then here, you stole my boyfriend, you insulted my mother, and you scared my cat. Okay. And if, again, someone asks, yeah, why did I scare your cat? Okay, then, of course, you have prepared additional rationales why that is so. Yeah? Or, if you think the audience might be a little bit more resisting your suggestion. So, if you bring your governing thought at the beginning, that maybe immediately, more or less, 80% of the audience will say, no, we are not going for this. For example, traveling expenses, when I say, when I start with, we can lower traveling expenses by 50% with help of 3 measures, that immediately they say, no, no, why should we lower the traveling expenses? What is this? Where does this idea come from? Then you should do it differently. Then you should, first of all, lead them through some steps, step by step. So basically what we usually say in our consulting time, we said for the first box, we said situation, explain the situation. You would say, well, you saw the travel expenses exploded in the last year, here are the facts. Then you ask the audience, do you agree? And then they should probably say yes, or if not, then you have to discuss. But when the audience says, yeah, well, this seems a serious situation in terms of traveling expenses, then you go on. Why is this a problem? Because that they are just exploded, yeah, well, that's a matter of fact. But why is this a problem? Then they say, for example, it has seriously effects on the return on investment. So do we now agree that this is a serious problem? Yeah, we agree. So, agree. And then I say, because it's exploded and we agree that it's a problem, okay, now I'll show you my solutions, how we can reduce it. Do you agree with these 3 solutions? Ideally yes, or maybe just with 2. Okay, then the summary is, if we take all 3 measures, we can increase return on investment by 0.5%. Yeah? So it's a more indirect way, if you feel there is some resistance, that you always can get the okay from the audience. And then at the end, of course, nobody can speak up and say, oh, that's the total idea, I don't like it. Then you can ask him, why didn't you speak up in the first place? Yeah? So these are the 2 different ways how you can, it's not optimal, blah, 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 everything. Okay, what about the material? Yeah, material, sometimes we have quality issues, blah, 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 blah. A machine, yeah, machine, we have this and that machine. Man, yeah, so what about, yeah, we have qualification issues, we have a big share of younger employees, blah, blah. So, as a first start, it's a good idea at least to structure the issues that might lead to the problem. Yeah? It's a first start. Of course, it's not rocket science. What we did, and in those times it was new. Nowadays, many companies do it in that way. So what we did, we had a exhibit title that has everyone. For example, this is market demand for, no idea what that is. So market demand, yeah, in the unit US dollars, million US dollars. And then I give a nice chart with a lot of figures, but the interesting thing here is this so-called message or action title. This is directly taken from your storyline. So what you could do, you can create, let's say, 12 empty slides and already put the title on it. And then you know, okay, whatever I show on this picture, it should support the message title. And that's very important that you then know, okay, it should at the end demand for groglets. Does anyone know what that is? No? No idea? Maybe it's just made up. Has more than doubled over the past 5 years. That's the key message. And then I have to find out, okay, what is the right exhibit form, how I can express that thought. So that would be the next step. Making 12 empty dummy slides and putting the title on the top. And then you have to think about, okay, how do I convey this message? And of course, you know that a chart usually does a much better job in transferring a message than text. Yeah? So usually professors are bad examples because professors usually put a lot of text on their slides, isn't it? Yeah, because it's a mixture between presentation and handout, yeah, sometimes. But if you're doing a business presentation, you should use less text and give more graphical information because this can be grasped more easily. I mean, we could do a comparison. If I can also give you this information as text, but that's unreadable, and you will not even see the growth in demand. But here it's very clear. You have this growth in demand. You also distinguished, I think the color went away, you also distinguish between different channels. You have the share, you have the total number, you have the year, you have some information on the source because somebody might challenge you, oh, where did you get that information from? I don't know this aid. And then you say, well, the source is Mr. So-and-so, that's the data from the business warehouse, blah, 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 so you can prove it. And maybe some additional comments. Now, the last question I want to tackle is what kind of graphical display do you use? Because if you open PowerPoint, you're overwhelmed by hundreds of possibilities, pie charts, flow charts, 3D, 2D, moving, not moving, bubbles, green, red, yellow. I think you can forget all these things in PowerPoint because actually every or nearly every title or action title is a comparison, and every kind of comparison can be depicted best by more or less 1 or 2 different kinds of graphics. And that's something I can really recommend as a book. There's a book from this guy, very difficult to pronounce. So it's Z-E-L-A-Z-N-Y, Zelazny. And he has written a book that is called, what is the name? I forgot the title. Something like how to create charts from data or something, a little bit different, yeah? How to, yeah, maybe it comes up later. Zelazny. And this is really excellent because it's not about the details of drawing slides, but it's about what kind of graphics to use. And he has a proposal, and he says basically what you have to do, not the data is of interest, but the statement, our title. Most statements are comparisons, and for each comparison, or each comparison can be best represented by one graph. And what he says is basically, what do you want to express? A certain component, an item, a time series, a frequency distribution, or a correlation. And if you can tell me what you want to express, I show you the right graphics. And as you can see, you don't need these 500 templates from PowerPoint. but maybe you need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. And that's very important because you're, with these many templates, you're totally confusing your audience, yeah? And with the colors in 2D and 3D, but it's really sufficient to use very basic graphics and maybe use them over and over again. They're very simple, but they transfer the message. Yeah? And maybe as a short test, because I know you're speedy learners, I have some questions for you. So if you have the title on your slide, in region C, productivity is the lowest, how would you depict that on? If you put in, let's say, 20% of your effort, trying to be MECE in these logic trees, that might take you, let's say, 3 hours for a simple question, or maybe 5 hours, 6 hours for a more difficult question. Stop after 6 hours, because after 20% of your time, you might have already come up with 80% of the sensible questions or answers. Of course, you could now spend another week on this logic tree and try to optimize it, try to draw it differently. So you might spend another 5 days, but what you probably just will find out are maybe another 10, 15% more ideas, and that's usually not worth the time. Yeah? So be aware that this logic tree after half a day will be not perfect. It's not perfect. And of course, if you show this tree to your clients, they will somehow shoot at it and say, well, there's a mistake, and this is not correct, and this is not correct. But it's not a problem, because it's your suggestions. If they criticize the tree, they should come up with a better suggestion, and then you take the suggestion. So stop after 20% of the effort. Do not try to get that perfect. And of course, when you're now presenting the findings of your tree and you receive critique from your clients, maybe you can somehow prevent this critique by saying from the beginning, here's a first try. Of course, I know it's a very rough and first selection or collection of ideas, but the only idea is to get discussion started. And of course, I'm not here just to tell you my ideas, but we are all in one team to collect ideas we already have. Yeah? And of course, that needs a little bit of, let's say, stand up there, being a little bit brave, take some critique, yeah? Keep cool, but you can be sure that you add a lot of value, because you will think a little bit out of the box, because you're not